There's a huge audience here, so we got to make sure we keep them on their toes. So we call this meeting of the Reading School Committee to order, August 10th. I'm coming from a birthday party, so deal with me. Just going to quickly walk through the agenda for today, and then we'll dive right in and go from there. So obviously the call of order now, we have public comment. We actually do have the public here, so we might have a comment. We have consent agenda, of which there's 3 items. We have reports, of which we'll probably only have 2, maybe 3, depending upon liaison updates that people may have. Then we'll go into personnel, and we'll do what is essentially a rubber stamp approval of Dr. Milichewski to these collective boards, because that's his role and it fits him the best. We'll have a brief conversation about the superintendent review timeline discussion, so we can set ourselves up for goals in the next meeting and or early September. And making sure we're on the same page about that. Then we have a plethora of policies to review, mostly financial in nature, all of which we had previously notified back in June, including one that's a revocation. So 8 amendments and 1 revocation. We then move to new business, and we have a brand new policy, so it's going to go through the 2 reading process, and that's the DVDA Special Education Reserve Policy that will be discussed. We'll move on from there to liaison and subcommittee discussion, and we'll loop Charter Review Committee, which is a new committee, into that discussion as well. And the last bullet on the new business is really not business, it's just notification, that we will have 4 more policies for single review coming in our next meeting on August 24th. And finally, we will adjourn to executive session for strategy with respect to collective bargaining, the Teachers Association and paraprofessionals and secretaries. One more note for the board, the committee here. We're saving Aaron from reading and everybody from saying, you know, waive the reading by just, the motion's going to be, we're going to start by waiving the reading for all of the 8 policies. If anybody has objections and really wants her to read, then you can vote no on that motion, but that's our attempt to keep us moving today.
I thought that was how we haze new vice chairs.
I sort of alluded to that to her.
I'm a little salty. All those times we could have saved you.
So with that said, is there any public comment? Please.
From the public here.
Thanks, Tom. Chris Haley, 71 Tennyson Road. Last year, with the help of the Select Board, School Committee, Town Manager, the Superintendent, teachers, principals, et cetera, Dunk the Readings at the Fall Street Fair raised over $2,000 to go towards the Reading Rotary, and Liliana at Rough and Ready dog grooming over in Reading. So this year, I'm back to ask you all once again for your help. This time around, half the money is going to go to the Reading Rotary, and the other half is going to go to 2020 RMHS graduate Autumn Hendrickson, who's been working on her book and her research for all the men and women that served during World War II. So that would be, you know, going towards a good cause and a fellow graduate that you guys can be somewhat closer to than the last one. So yeah, I'm just asking for your help once again. Tom, anybody else, teachers, principals, whoever you want to get, they're always a big draw. Derek, I know you're new. Yeah, I'll invite you, do whatever, half hour, that's all we need. You can get dunked, collect balls, money, whatever you want to do. And then rumor has it there might be a DeLorean time machine as well from Back to the Future, but, you know, we'll see how that goes. And that's all I got.
Great.
So thank you all.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris, you can count me in, and I'll spread the word to our principals and staff right away. I'm sure we'll have some interest, so bring it on.
I'll send an email later, too.
We'll spread it out. Awesome.
I think you already know you can count me in too, 3 years in a row. I'm the biggest heckler there is, so I have to be up there. Okay, so we'll move on to our consent agenda, and do we start with a motion?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. And we'll now move on to reports. And You want Derek to start? Derek?
Pinto, you're up.
Thank you very much. So Derek Pinto, Director of Finance and Operations. This is week 3 for me. Thank you very much for the warm welcome and the support in the role. I much appreciate it. I got a few things to share. I'll start with facilities. So I've had the opportunity to tour 4 of the schools so far with the Director of Facilities, Joe Huggins, and I got to compliment facility staff on the top-notch work that they've been doing in getting us ready for the start of the school year. So very pleased with what I've seen. I look forward to the second half of the tour, which is starting on Monday. So Monday I'll be back out again to visit the remaining schools. IT, we've got some good news there. Laptop distribution for high school students is going to start early, so starting Wednesday to Friday of next week. So it's the first time that they've been out front like that, so that's great. And we've received some hardware for network upgrades. So for the end user, this is going to mean it's an elimination of bottlenecks, so it'll look like faster internet, faster and more consistent internet across the district. For transportation, we've begun notifying parents and students of their bus assignments so that they know who's assigned to which buses and the routes as well. We'll also be meeting with the transportation provider this week to discuss and make sure we're as wrinkle-free as possible for the start of school. Food services, lots of good news there, but I'll keep it brief. There's a full kitchen renovation at Eaton. At Coolidge, there's a new serving line, ovens, and to-go merchandise. The high school has reconfigured their existing serving line. Parker's got a new salad bar, so lots of equipment going to be installed next week, well in time for the start of school. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Any questions? Okay, seeing
I'd like
none.
to thank Dr. Pinto for jumping in just right away and diving into all different things across our district. For those who don't know Derek, we gave a little context during the hiring process, but he's been a teacher, a principal, CFO in California, also worked at the college level and a couple, both on the West Coast and out here on the East Coast, most recently as the vice president at LaSalle University too. So he's jumped in right away, and we're thrilled to have you as part of the team. So
Thanks, thank you.
welcome aboard. And as you know, once you jump in, you're full steam ahead, so hit the ground running. I have a couple of quick updates and thank yous. The first is just a thank you to everyone who worked ESY. So we had 63 staff members, primarily RPS staff, working ESY, and about 200 students. From all accounts, from those participating, it was a major success, which ESY ended today. I'd just like to thank, first of all, thank all the students who showed up with smiles on their faces today, ready to learn and spent their summertime in classrooms, engaged, learning. I think they had a great summer and appreciate their participation and engagement. Also thank the 63 staff members to give up the vast majority of summer to spend with our students. We really appreciate that level of commitment and doing it with just enthusiasm. Every time I was there, the teachers are just all in, smiling, really enjoying their time around kids, which I know is difficult after 180 days of a year or two. So a huge thank you to all the staff who showed up throughout the summer. Just 2 other quick updates. One, anyone who knows anyone who may be interested in joining our RPS team, we have some open positions. You can look online. We do have some para positions mostly, and we have a couple of teaching positions and a couple other tutoring positions across the district. If you have any interest, please help spread the word. We're looking for anyone who wants to jump in and join the team. Lastly, some schools have sent out a quick announcement, so some people may know we're looking for some students who may be interested in dancing tomorrow, 9 a.m. in the PAC. Anyone who wants to be a part of our back-to-school video. As you may know, the last couple of years we've done a back-to-school music video, which was generally well received, I think, by the community. This year we wanted to also make it a little bit more student-facing with some more students in the mix dancing. So if you know anyone who's out there who likes to get in and either dance or just have their face in the back-to-school video, we'd love to see as many kids as possible. That'll be in the PAC tomorrow at 9 a.m., and we have a videographer coming to take some video footage. If you're coming with elementary students, we would hope that the parents would stay for a little bit. Middle and high school kids can come on their own too. So if you know anyone, spread the word. It should be a fun little bit of time, and then they'll be famous across Reading in a couple of weeks. That's all.
Okay, great. We'll move on to liaison reports, and we'll start down with Carla.
Great, thanks, Tom. The Killam Building Committee is in full swing since we have our OPM on board. We had a meeting on Monday. We approved members to be on the design search team. We approved Colliers, who's our owner's project manager, introduced their project manager, Susanna Yoon. and so the committee approved her and voted on her as well. And that name will go to the MSBA for their approval. Yesterday, we had a kickoff meeting with the OPM at Killam. There was a lot of people in attendance. They are preparing the request for services for the designer, so they had some questions to get answers to, so they could tailor that request for services a little bit more. So it's getting exciting. You know, by hopefully the end of November, we'll have a designer on board, and then things will really kick up. We're having executive meetings once a week between superintendent, the town manager, and me and Karen Herrick, the vice chair of the committee. So we're doing those weekly meetings just to make sure we have all eyes on our schedule and things like that. So,
Great.
thank you.
Any questions? Sean?
No report.
Sarah?
No report.
Aaron?
No report.
My report essentially was covered by the agenda. We have 4 more policies for next week that we reviewed on the 29th of June and approved as a subcommittee. So that's that. Okay, so let's move on. The first item for our regular agenda here is the appointment of the superintendent to the SEAM Collaborative and North Shore Education Consortium. And we'll start with a motion, and then we'll see if there's any discussion.
Move to appoint Dr. Milichewski, the Superintendent of Reading Public Schools, to the Board of Directors of the SEAM Collaborative and the North Shore Education Consortium according to MGL Chapter 40, Section 4E.
Second?
Seconded by Carla. Any discussion? No? Tom's like, I don't want it.
No, I enjoy being a part of those boards too, so it's,
All right, seeing no further discussion, all in favor? And all opposed, and it passes 5-0. So let's move on to the superintendent review timeline discussion now. And there's a memo in the packet that outlines a couple of options, but I'm certainly open to further feedback from the committee if there's any other ideas people have. The packet includes a note. Chargers coming in. Which comes from the DESE process that specifically refers to our particular case. And so it's something for us to think about how we want to approach this. You know, traditionally or historically, we've done one-year reviews, and last year we moved up the formative a little bit to be mid-January, early February, so it was a little bit more middle of the year. So that's one option, is that standard one-year review. The second option is potentially to go to a 2-year review, in which case we would do a formative in May, June of 2024, and a summative in May, June of 2025. The DESE documentation has the following. It says a 1-year cycle for superintendents in their first 3 years is important, and Dr. Milichewski is now through his second and starting his third. Then it says, at the committee's discretion, it may be extended to 2 years for superintendents working under extended contracts, although annual goals are still strongly recommended. So, as we all know, Dr. Milichewski is now starting a 6-year contract, so he fits that extended contract. So we're at a little bit of a interesting inflection point for us to see whether we want to do 1 year or 2 year. And I'm not going to have the motion yet, because the motion will be to the 1 or 2 year. So I wanted to open the floor for conversation, see what anybody thought, and then we can proceed from there. Sean?
Not that I expect, a review to go poorly by any means, but it's a relatively high leverage year with union negotiations and a lot of progress on Killam to be had, and some priorities lingering from the last couple of years around math pathways and things like that. So I'm inclined to stick with the 1-year cycle for those reasons, just because of sort of we're going into yet another very impactful year, and I think it's appropriate to keep us on a 1-year cycle for those reasons.
Okay. Sarah?
I would echo that as well. I think I would lean towards the 1-year review, just given the pace at which we're moving this year, but could be persuaded to 2 as long as we had some other kind of checkpoint plan to make sure we were tracking on progress.
Okay. Aaron?
So clarifying question, if we went to a 2-year cycle, are the goals automatically 2 years?
The goals, would be annual, but there could be some, as we often have, that go more than a year.
Right.
Right? So
Like,
You
we
would
sort of
want,
ran
you
into
would
that
want
this
to
year.
have some degree of SMART goals that are time-bound to the end of the next school year. And then there might be some that carry over to the whole review cycle of 2 years. But they stress, try to get annual goals still as much as possible.
Yeah, I guess I don't have a really strong opinion, because I think if we did the 2-year cycle, we would do the formative review in May or June, and that would be an opportunity to give some pretty explicit feedback, even though we wouldn't be, rating the indicators in the same way. I still feel like it would be an opportunity to give really clear feedback. Not that I don't feel like we don't do that all the time, but, in a public, formal way.
Okay. Carly, your hand's up.
I'm inclined to vote for the 2-year. I feel like we are consistently, and Tom asks for our feedback consistently, and I always felt like whatever feedback we gave, he always pivoted, and he always heard us and made it happen. I'm completely comfortable with the 2-year, knowing that formative review is in 1 year, because I feel like the checkpoints we have are so consistent, and
Yeah, I'm on the fence on this one. I think my default is always going to be 1 year. That's what my default is going to be. With that, I'd actually like to see us do 1 year and do it a little bit more exhaustively than we've done the last couple of years. Raise the bar on the indications, or the categories that we review a little bit more. I said this to Tom, I think I said it during the review. It's almost too easy for him right now. And I think we want to make sure he continues to raise that bar, just as he's raising that bar on everybody else. And Sean, your point about pretty high leverage year, we have 5 pretty large union contracts under discussion. Killam, there's a lot to be done this year, but I think arguably the next year is the bigger leverage year on Killam, but there's a lot to be done this year. We have so many other things that are in flight that might see more movement this year, though. You pointed out Math Pathways, we have ARC K-2 going this year, and there's some pivot that has to happen there as well, in terms of how we handle things. So my default is 1. Somewhat like Sarah, I might be able to be convinced with 2, but I really think 1 is probably the one I'm most comfortable with.
Sorry, just one other consideration. It's easily addressed via side letter or otherwise, but there are some elements of Dr. Milichewski's contract that are sort of dependent on an annual review. So we'd have to think through that as well.
Yep.
Good point.
Sarah, you want to say something?
If I recall correctly, and I might not because I'm in summer vacation mode, last year, the mid-year and other year updates were kind of leading towards the end of your review. If we could still keep some of those touch points to make sure we were progressing towards and have those updates, because, you get towards the end of the year, end of the 2 years, and we haven't checked in on progress, et cetera. It's like, oh, what did I do again? And it's hard to remember as you get there. So kind of putting those formal points in place to make sure we're tracking towards the 2-year, I would feel more comfortable with the 2-year.
So that, we obviously can schedule ourselves from a meeting perspective to get as many updates as we want to. From a review perspective, there's only 2, right? There's the formative and the summative. So arguably, by doing it, in a 2-year and having, checkpoints halfway through the 1 year, that you get further away from the formative and so it could be more of a challenge, but then you have the full year,
Right.
playback. Are you opposed to 1 year? Carla, I'll ask you the same. Are you
Yeah,
opposed to 1 year?
I'm not opposed to it. I'm not sure I agree with adding more indicators, but I'm not opposed to it. I think, like I said, I could kind of go either way. I really like that we've been consistent about doing the formative. I think that's important. It does feel a little condense the time from the formative to the summative, the way that we do it now. This past year, the summative felt a little late, like we're still doing it as school was ending, and that timeline kind of felt tough to me personally, but, yeah, I don't know, I guess I feel like because we're starting this big new district strategic plan, that I envision some of the goals are gonna be longer goals at this point, because your goals are so linked. You know, you're in the third year of the superintendent program, but that's never been a big focus of ours.
Big focus for him.
Yeah, I mean, you're a good student, Tom, so we know you participate very well in that, but, so I guess even though I know there's major things happening this year, I also feel like we're starting some major initiatives that are gonna naturally be a little bit longer. So in some ways, when you combine that with the contract and knowing we have him for a lot longer, you know, I guess I was kind of leaning toward the 2-year, but do I feel strongly? No.
How strongly do you feel?
I wouldn't vote for a year. I would vote for a 2-year. Part of me says we need to get out of his way because nobody's more motivated than him. And he's going to achieve his goals regardless if we have an assessment, and people are going to say, well, that's your job. An assessment that we do, I am comfortable with our continuous assessments with him and our continuous feedback loops with him. I have absolutely no, I don't think we should do a 1 year. I think 2 years is completely fine. Because I think our goals too are, we know where we're headed. We know what things we want to achieve. We need to give him some time to be able to get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any further thoughts or final
I was just going to say, I'm open to 2. I mean, I expressed my inclination, but I'm also open to 2 years for a lot of the reasons stated. And it's not like we wouldn't have, you know,
Yeah.
we'd just have a formative, or, yeah, formative at the end of the year instead of a summative,
Right.
you know, so I'd be fine with that.
Dr. Milczewski, do you have any feedback, thoughts, input, concerns?
I have no preference in the sense that I feel like you all give me feedback consistently. I feel like you give it, you know, when we meet one-on-one, I feel like you would give it publicly either way on reports. So I feel like whether that comes in the, you know, through the form of a formative or a summative, it really doesn't matter a ton to me. I have confidence that the committee will continue to push me and challenge me. So I whatever that looks like, I have no preference.
Okay, so I'm sensing that there's enough here that would go to 2-year, that's what the motion probably should be. And if it's 4-1 or 5-0 or 3-2, then it is what it is. But we also, if we do vote for that, we'll also commit that we continue throughout the year to get regular checkpoints in that we do, which we will do anyway, but we'll commit to that. So it's an easy layup commitment, but we'll get it done. And if we do that as well, we still need to think about what goals are going to be in the annual cycle. So we can't give up on the annual goals in the process. Okay?
And
So
we'll have it to do a side letter or something to adjust the contract terms as necessary.
That's a fair point as well.
Yep.
Okay? So, Aaron?
So just to clarify, would the formative be in June?
May/June of 2024, yeah, depending on timing and how things work, yeah,
And the summative would be in May/June of 2025?
correct.
Okay. Okay. Move to approve the 2-year superintendent review timeline with a formative review in May or June of 2024 and a summative review in May or June of 2025.
Second.
Seconded by Sean, any further discussion? All right, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. Okay, so that informs us a little bit for our next meeting as we prepare things and lay things out, so, all right. Good, so let's move on. And now we get to the policies. So in the packet, I included, well, I think we included, all of the policies that we had included back in June as part of this. And I added a memo from a bunch of feedback that Dr. Coram had given Sean and I right before the second meeting. Some of those policies, I've already made some of those changes because they were basic minor edit changes. Some of them, I have some other feedback from Michelle and/or Susan from when that feedback was coming in. I've also had a chance to sit down with Dr. Pinto to go through them as well, so he, sees them a little bit. He doesn't have the full context, obviously, but at least he has had a chance to go through them a little bit, and then we can work our way from there. Michelle also added in the documentation around MTA and their PTS documentation, so that answered some of the questions as well, and we can work our way from there. So we'll start with the reading waiving motion, and then we'll work our way from 1A all the way down. So Erin, why don't you start from there?
Move to waive the reading of all policies in section D1 of the agenda.
Second.
Seconded by Carla. Any discussion? All in favor? All right, so that passes, and we have waived the reading. So we will move on to GCJ, sorry. And I'm going to go ahead and launch the share as well, so people can see it there if you don't look at it in the packet, and people on home can see it as well. So let me get my share going. Of course, the host is disabled sharing, so how is that possible when I'm the host? Host. Okay. Let's try this again. There we go.
Yep.
Okay, so here is the GCJ, and I'm going to make it a bit bigger so people can see it. As background here again, and Erin, jump in from any policy subcommittee stuff that we may have gone through. This originally came up as a request of Michelle as she was going through different policies and, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, is it in alignment with law, is it not? And we've adjusted it to align with the law. This was not a mass-specific one. This was a Reading administration-specific one. So we've adjusted it to align with the law. And the biggest adjustments here is the implementation of the term of qualifying years. One of the notes from Dr. Corum is to make it qualifying year, because it could be one qualifying year, theoretically. Although that's also for debate in the intent. And that includes, the fact that they will have executed the year under an appropriate license, and that they won't have leave greater than 30 calendar days. One of the questions that was asked is that meant to be 30 in total? So if they have 220 and that's therefore 40, does that exclude them? And the answer is it could exclude them. We have the option. So that would be an option from a HR perspective to exclude them. The way it's written, that would account for that as well. It doesn't say a single leave. It says, although you could say no leave, maybe it does mean you might be read as a single leave, so if we want to clean up the language appropriately, we could. But otherwise, this is the policy that came through the committee, and I'll open up for further discussion. If I missed anything in that, now that you have that memo open, please jump in.
I still just want to clarify and understand both what our intent is and what we believe the effect of this version is.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the case that a teacher that completes 3 years under appropriate licenses and so forth is granted PTS independent of whether or not we are extending them an offer to return?
If we don't notify them by the specific date, yes. Right, Dr. Malachowski?
Correct.
It's June 15th.
Correct.
If we don't notify by June 15th, it's yes. But we have, through their reviews and other abilities, to say you have not met standard, and therefore we're notifying that you're not achieving PTS.
So it's not just the notification, we also have to have messaged it have essentially said that they haven't had 3 successful qualifying years via review or something along those lines. What about in the case where we're not extending an offer, not because of somebody's performance, but because of budgetary reasons, for instance?
That falls under, well, if it's coming up on the 3rd year, that becomes an interesting point, right? So
Yeah, I don't know if it would happen, but,
Right.
I'm just trying to think through the gaps here.
The answer to that question from a budgetary perspective falls back to the contract. And the contract with the RTA falls back to tenure.
Yeah.
So they would likely be one of the first ones out as a result of tenure. not having a longer standing period in the time. That's my interpretation.
It's exactly correct. And two, as you likely know, too, you do not need to give a reason within the first 3 years of why someone is not going to be, renewed.
Right,
So,
but if it's June 16th and we all of a sudden hit a budget crisis for the next year, and we have to, for some reason, do layoffs, they just received their PTS on June 15th, they're low person on the totem pole.
But
and
still
likely
above
to
everybody
be-
without PTS. at
Correct.
that point.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, so it's our belief then that if for any reason we notify a teacher by June 15th that they are not being offered a position the next year, they would not be granted PTS on June 15th. That's our belief and expectation
Correct.
based on this
That's
language?
what the
Yep,
law says, and
correct.
that's what this says, yeah.
Okay,
And it doesn't matter whether it's budget, performance, just want to move a different direction.
okay.
So one of the things Dr. Corm raised is the or otherwise allowed by law or regulation, and review with legal, that is the right way to put it. There is, their decision could be in accordance with our policy, but sometimes the law supersedes and trumps, or in fact, every time the law supersedes and trumps our policy. Our policy can be more restrictive, but it can't, there are certain things it can do, but the law trumps it. So that's another thing there. That language as it's written is right and should not change.
I don't think he was disagreeing with that language. I think there was a minor grammatical thing there. Because the beginning of the sentence, attaching the beginning of the sentence to that clause would say, the superintendent will base their decisions in accordance with or otherwise allowed by law or regulation. Like there's just I think there's a grammatical challenge there. It's not the language about otherwise allowed by law or regulation. It's,
So he wanted to change it and other allowable law, but that's not necessarily what the intent is, right? It's not, he'll review it in this, it can be in accordance with the policy, or,
I think literally just inserting the word as after or would address what Dr. Corum was getting at from a grammatical perspective without changing the language you're trying to include here. The superintendent will base their decisions in accordance with school committee policy or as otherwise allowed by law or regulation.
okay? I have no problem with that. I also really have no problem with a qualifying year.
I was
as
going to say
defined
a
as.
qualifying year instead of qualifying years.
Any other feedback?
Can I ask
Sarah?
a question about point 2 under qualifying year?
Yep.
Is that any leave? Is that federally protected leave? Is that just inclusive of anything, or are there exceptions?
This is where the MTA documentation comes in FMLA, well, the FMLA will say they can get their job back if they're gone, but it doesn't say that that part of their time will count towards anything they will accrue, right? So that's part of the understanding there is, if you leave, but you don't have PTS, you will still get a job and you'll start basically where you were, right? You won't, it's any leave, basically, because this is in that PTS, in that pre-PTS period. If you're on FMLA and you're out for 8 weeks, that's 40 days. You're outside the calendar year. That year will not count towards your PTS. We have the option to not count it, is really what that is. Not that it, and we should notify them appropriately. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So, Aaron, let's start with the motion, and then we'll see if there's any further updates. You would use the as amended.
Move to adopt policy GCJ, professional teacher status, as amended.
With a second.
Second.
Seconded by Carla. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. So that is done and final. So our next one is DGA. And share the screen again, DGA. Okay, so DGA is one that came out of the MASC reviews. And the MASC review basically made the policy non-aligned with our process, right? So in a conversation as the policy subcommittee, we decided that we would prefer to reflect our process instead, and we rewrote DGA to reflect our process as we do it. So that's the intent of what's here. So if anybody sees we need to update anything, we certainly can do that. But what we essentially did is that, you know, as most everybody here knows, when there's a contract that needs to be signed, the chair signs it. We will receive warrants and bills, and we sign them all together. And then anything that's covered by FERPA or employee privacy laws, we delegate to the superintendent, who delegates appropriately to Dr. Stice or anybody else who needs to do it, or Michelle. Some of the feedback here from Dr. Corum was in that first sentence after bullet 3. In the first 2 cases, a record of this approval will be made available on the then current or at the next regular committee agenda. That language you might want to clean up. And so that's that. I'm open, the floor's open for any other feedback or any other updates. None? So I want to refresh myself on exactly what Dr. Corum said for the then current.
It shouldn't say at agenda, or
Yeah.
at the next regular committee agenda, it should say, or on the next regular committee agenda.
It says will be made available on the then current or on the next regular committee agenda. Okay. So that is one we do not currently do yet. That's something we'd have to get into a habit of doing.
Can we just strike the then current? I mean, what's the use case where that would happen? Wouldn't it always just be the next regular committee agenda?
Well, we put that in there initially because right when we were drafting this is when you started putting the warrants on here for one meeting. So theoretically, we would have enough notice to put the warrants on there as part of the consent agenda. And we can verbally yes, but then we can sign it as well,
Oh, I see. Okay.
right?
I understand. Okay, gotcha. I was thinking of contracts versus warrants, but that makes sense.
Right? So it's that one that fits that category. You know, another example here, I think, Sean, you just signed the extension for Tom's contract. That would should have gone on this agenda theoretically if this policy was in place. As a note. Okay? All right, so,
Sorry, so we are, even though we voted on the contract, we voted on, you know, we had language, et cetera, we're just putting, on the subsequent agenda, we're putting that the chair and the superintendent signed it, is essentially what all we're doing, we're just noting that?
in the case of the
It's been
first one, it's just the chair that we're
Yeah.
notifying of. but yeah,
Sure, but,
Yeah,
so we're just creating a record that it has been signed at the next meeting, okay,
right,
all right.
exactly. Okay? It is as amended again, and we'll take the motion.
Move to adopt policy DGA, authorized signatures as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor? All opposed, and it passes 5-0. And we move on to DH. And that requires me to scroll somewhere. DH is a very simple and straightforward one. It actually did come up in one of the conversations with Susan last year when she was talking about having people bonded for student activity accounts. So this was a minor edit that was there, really, really minor, mostly cross-references, mostly MGL references tied into it as well. Not much else to say about this one. Carla?
You're not talking about the parents of accounts.
No, we don't control those.
All right,
We're talking about the student activity accounts that maybe the class of something that it has, the advisors that are in charge of that account.
gotcha.
Okay? Okay, we'll take this without an amendment.
Move to adopt policy DH, bonded employees and officers.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. So moving on to DI. And so DI is a little bit more substantive update from MASC, and it's only from MASC. And it just basically aligns things with how the state of Massachusetts is working through their fiscal accounting and making sure that we're in alignment with that. So, maintaining effective controls, and then the accounting system will use the Uniform Massachusetts Accounting System. We'll receive periodic financial statements from the superintendent showing the financial condition anytime, whenever requested, or when we request it. Again, it also includes additional cross-references, some of which we've already approved, and one more we're going to approve later tonight. And the legal references have been linked and updated.
Is the use of the word statements, is that in MGL? Is that why we changed that? Because I would describe what we've typically seen not as statements, actually.
I would agree with you. I don't know if that's necessarily in MGL. Let's see if I can click through. It's more of a, that's what MASC updated, and that's what Susan was comfortable with.
Okay.
But I would agree, it's not a financial statement that we see right now. And that's not going to share for you, but let me see if I see it in here. No, it's not an MGL. Not for that particular reference.
I mean, statements refers to very specific financial documents and formats and whatnot. Personally, I'd be more comfortable genericizing this to updates or reports, something along those lines. If there's not an explicit requirement in MGL that we view financial statements. I don't know, Dr. Pinto, I'd be curious if you have any, or Dr. Milczewski, either if you have any thoughts on that. It would be a departure from the norm for us to look at something that's structured like a P&L, for instance.
We do have sort of a chart of accounts type update, but not much more than that,
Yeah.
at a high level.
I think I lean the way that you propose around more generalized around updates. I think that makes more sense.
More accurate.
I think that's fine. That may be a little broader, right? And eliminate that concern that you have about it being formatted in a specific way.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm fine with either. It could be interpreted also a little more broadly and statements as being general updates.
Aaron's going to be moving seats here soon. So we want to go with updates, financial updates instead.
Yeah, I was thinking updates or reports. I'd be fine with either one. Updates is what we had before, so it still works from my perspective.
Any other preferences? No?
No.
So we'll go back to updates. Okay, I have no problem with that.
The next line as well.
Okay, so as amended in this case.
Yep. Move to adopt policy DI, fiscal accounting and reporting, as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any further? Nope. All in favor? All opposed? And that passes 5-0. Yeah, let's find a charger for. see if
You
we-
just need a
How big is that? Oh, you got, so that's an extension for that, so can we? Oh, where this is, oh, this is just a battery.
Yeah, but it doesn't
It
connect to
doesn't
mine, no.
Here, plug that in.
we just need a power cord.
This
What?
is just a battery. Plug that in there. Take this off here. while she's getting reoriented, we move on from DI to DIE. Now, this one was a more substantive change. Most of the red was added as a result of MASC-related updates. We did have to update and align and make sure it was aligned to the Town of Reading bylaws, in particular Section 335, where we appoint 2 members to the audit committee. And, add that the audit committee determines the firm or firms of independent auditors to audit and report on the financial statements issued by the town. It did add, a few other things in terms of what is in part of the audit, in terms of what can be audited. One thing here that was also something that Susan raised last year was student activity accounts. And accounts that exceed 25,000 shall be considered, the school shall consider an audit to be conducted by an outside firm every 3 years. So we have a few that are in that realm. And so we'll have to keep our eyes on those. Other than that, I think it's relatively straightforward.
I think there's a typo in the third bullet.
Okay?
It says, as a district that spends about thresholds required. I'm assuming that should say above.
That is one of the ones I think Dr. Coram mentioned, but I thought I had something from, that's DJ, so this is not it. So above, actually, I did look this up. These thresholds, this USC Chapter 35, that's not a typo, I don't believe so. I'm gonna pull up the MASC one real quick just to check that and see if I missed it, but I don't think it's a typo. Because the thresholds change, and you have to be careful about them. Dr. Pinto, I don't know if you remember from the federal audits how much the thresholds change, or,
But it doesn't specify the threshold. It
I
just-
know, but that's why it's about, because, instead of above. This is one I did look up in detail at one point. I don't have it off the top of my head right now, unfortunately. I'm okay changing it to above for now, but I might come back and have a small amendment at some point in time.
We could leave about as long as we move required and after it, right? That spends about the required
Should it be
threshold.
about the threshold?
About the required threshold.
About the required
I
threshold?
can't imagine that the Single Audit Act says that if you spend
Consider-
about the threshold, you're subject, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, the Single Audit Act
The
covers-
definition of a threshold is if you exceed it, something is triggered, right?
Yeah, but the Single Audit Act covers every federal fund we receive. So if we receive a certain amount, and this is also saying, not every year, maybe we may go above that threshold. So this is, as a district that, if we add the word above, as a district that spends above thresholds required, we may not always. The IDEA one is one that puts us above the threshold as it stands right now, and that's likely to stay there for a while. But that was one of it. Let me find the MASC one. But I'm pretty sure MASC has this too. Not that MASC hasn't made mistakes, because we've seen plenty of them. So I'm not saying it's that. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not going crazy real quick.
It's 750,000 or more in a year.
It was 450, it's changed to something else, yeah. Yeah, MASC has about, as a district that spends about thresholds required, the district is subject to the Single Audit Act.
I still think it's a mistake.
Weird language.
I think it's a mistake by MASC,
It's just weird
But-
language.
but, yeah.
So, what about, okay, let's just, anybody opposed to above? Derek, do you have any thoughts?
I'm not opposed to it.
Let's just make it easy that way. Above thresholds required, above the thresholds required.
Cleaner.
Okay?
Sure.
Okay. Anything further on this one?
Ready?
Yep, let's go with it as amended.
Move to adopt policy DIE audits as amended.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And that passes 5-0. Cooking with gas. All right, so we now move on to DJ. Which is purchasing. And this one is principally MASC again. We do have some additional legal feedback at the bottom where we reserve our right to return the goods and not approve the payment. That's a right we have via MGL 4156. It protects us from paying for anything unauthorized that may have been ordered but is not authorized. This otherwise is pretty standard. Susan was quite comfortable with it. Any questions, any feedback? Okay, let's move forward with the motion.
Move to adopt policy DJ purchasing.
Second.
Seconded by Carla. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And that passes and moves forward. Okay. And we move to DJA. Let me see if I got this in the right mode. Go back to markup so we can see the changes. All right, so this is, again, primarily MASC updates. And legal added the last line, all procurement of goods or services must follow best business practices and/or procurement laws. There's also a reference to the Home Rule Charter 5.2N, and that in particular is the town manager's role, in particular where he's called out as the procurement officer for the town. So we work through him and by him in many things as well. Do you want to add anything? No? All right, let's take the motion.
Move to adopt policy DJA purchasing authority.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes. Okay. And DK, payment procedures. And DK has a reference to our recently approved DGA, and otherwise is related to mask updates. And we will take out the note at the bottom because we don't need to make any more edits when we finalize this. So I can just take this out now as well. Any feedback? None? Okay, we'll take the motion.
Move to adopt policy DK payment procedures.
Second.
Seconded by Carla. Any final discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? And it passes 5-0. All right. So, we are moving to the next item on the agenda, and that is the revocation of policy DJG, vendor relations. This, simply put, is being revoked because it's unnecessary. It's a recommendation of MASC, and the recommendation was seconded by our legal counsel and seconded by our Director of Finance and Operations at the time. There's no reason for this. It's unnecessary. Any comments or questions? Okay, we'll take the motion.
Move to revoke policy DJG, vendor relations.
Second?
Seconded by Carla. Any final discussion? All in favor? All opposed? None. And the policy is revoked by 5-0 vote. Okay. So we are ahead of schedule. I know that makes some people happy. It's not a first. Sean takes personal offense to that.
I said it just to get a rise.
All right, so we're now moving on to the first reading of a new policy. And Aaron, we'll let you start with this reading, and then we'll go forward from there. So this is our indoctrination of Aaron as.
So to be clear, I just start reading the policy, I'm not
And we
making a
have
motion
waited
yet. Okay. Special Education Reserve Fund.
Man, he's too nice. He went too quick.
Sean.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Carla. All in favor of waiving the reading? 5-0. So the reading is waived. We are now on the new policy. It should be seen on the screen. Just as a little bit of background, this policy, I think as the committee knows, came out of the conversation and the approval by town meeting of the new fund for Special Education Reserve Fund. It outlines the law, but it outlines how I wrote it, the policy committee agreed with it, Susan agreed with it, as we went through about how we would fund it and maintain it on a go-forward basis. So as you know, the law allows us to fund up to 2% of net school spend, which last year was about $960,000, give or take. Susan, in her forecasting and thinking through, thought that we would be safe with a 450 to 475 balance in there, and didn't think we needed much more. And that's where, more or less, where my head was as well. So you'll see in the funding rules section that we would fund up to 1% of the annual net school spending. The fund may grow with interest, so it may get up to 1.5%, but we'll commit to pulling out of it when it gets up to 1.5%, which keeps us well in line with MGL, which says we'd have to pull out when it starts getting above 2. And we also want to make sure it stays healthy, so if it goes below 0.5%, if we have extra money at the end of the year, we want to pump money back into it to revitalize it a little bit. The rest of the policy is basically the how, in terms of how we will make sure we are doing this. So we'll add it to the first and third quarter report that we'll get from the Director of Finance and Operations. Will tell us where we are in terms of versus net school spend, how much is in there and where we are versus net school spend. The first quarter one would be used ideally as input into the financial forums in the fall, in case we need to ask for money then to pull out or know that we're going to put money in from a budgeting perspective. And then the third quarter one would be used with some foresight into how much we deposit at the end of the year. Since we don't get the fourth quarter one until past the end of the year, we want to make sure we get it ahead of the end of the year. I have shared it with the chair of the select board and the chair of the finance committee. They have not had a lot of time to review it yet, but I told them this is our first reading and our second, so they have some time to review, and if they have feedback they want to send it to us, they can. With that said, it's our policy, it's not a shared policy. We do have a couple of shared policies in our manual, but this one is currently only ours, and frankly, I want to keep it that way so we can change it if we need to. If they want one for themselves, they can have one for themselves. I've also shared it with Fidel and Sharon as well, for them to give any feedback they have if there's anything else. It does have the feedback already of Susan and Chuck and Aaron, and is otherwise in good working order. So open the floor for feedback, thoughts, edits, questions. Sarah?
Go ahead, Sean.
No, go ahead.
I don't love including number 1 in there about the 1% max inclusion. I think having 2 and 3 in there, personally, I think is sufficient. I don't like boxing future decisions into, if state law allows us to go up to 2%, I think having numbers 2 and 3 about spending it down if we exceed 1.5 and maintaining a minimum of 0.5% is sufficient from my point of view.
Okay.
I guess I would be, I know Susan's reasoning behind that suggestion, but. don't love it.
So the other reasoning behind that suggestion was, as we've just, as sort of as I debated last time we had a meeting, right, was that we don't want to lock up money in a fund that we can't access except for this specific
Yep.
case, right?
Yep.
And that blocks anything from going back to free cash as well. So to spend 480,000 in a single year is a significant chunk of change. Things have to go really wrong for that to happen. Really wrong. So it was thought to be a very stable mode. Maybe we can soften that, leave it in there, but soften it, so it's not saying only add money, but it is suggested to only add money or something like that.
I would feel better about that. I just don't want to box us into, I think we would all be pretty prudent, and we had good conversation about it last time.
Yeah.
I just don't want to say, like, we cannot do something that there might, you never know.
Or the general practice is to only add money?
Yes, the thing that softens it, I would be comfortable with.
Okay.
I think we tagged the 1% number to roughly the equivalent of 3 out-of-district placements or something. Was, there was a,
No, it's more than that. I mean, you'd have to do 4 out-of-district home placements to get to that
Fair.
number.
the point, though, is that 1% today covers a certain amount of overage.
Yep.
As special education costs grow faster than net school spend does, that margin will shrink in terms of its practical use. So I kind of agree with Sarah. I think softening the language, but having a clear intent that 1% is sort of the target makes sense. And then in any case, we've created a ceiling at 1.5%, you know.
Okay, so, what did I say, a general guideline, is that what I said? Or just suggested?
Standard practice.
Standard.
Yeah, suggested, yeah, any of those would be okay. And I think you'd remove the due to interest accrual clause in the next one. Otherwise, that doesn't actually function as a ceiling. You could go over 1.5% by continuing to contribute.
Yeah.
If you stick to the standard practice, that would be your primary reason. If you go past the standard practice, it could be some other reason. So I could say due to interest accrual or other reasons.
Yeah, I just don't know that it's necessary. I mean, I think what we're trying to say here is,
Okay,
we think 1% is sort of the right target. 1.5% is the ceiling where the committee should be required to start spending that down.
Regardless of how it got to 1.5%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I'm just, would we get into a point where we're funding and then picking back out again?
I mean,
That was
ideally,
what I
we
was
would,
trying to do,
ideally,
but
we
put
would
those
choose
buffers in
not to
there.
fund
Yeah.
if we were coming up on 1.5%, which is what makes it function as a ceiling. Right, because otherwise you're in that silly position
So
where
you're saying if at the end of 1 year, we're coming up, then we just wouldn't put any money in that
Right.
year?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, so, playing devil's advocate, we could theoretically say, oh, it's standard practice to only go to 1, but, and we're sitting at 1.25, but we know already that we're on a tight budget next year, and we have 300,000 left this year, so let's throw 300,000 in the pool so we can pull it back out next year when we'll be playing games, right? In the way that we could be using that, because we can use it to special education. We could, there's special education costs all over the place. So what I was trying to do is say, let's not play games, right? It could get to that 1.5% because of interest or something else, not because we've put money in there and then we take it back out again. As we've written it now, as we've edited it now, we're allowing ourselves to put money in there and then take it back out again 2 days later, from June 30th to July 2nd, which I don't think is what we're intending, but that's what it would allow.
But that's because we softened number 1, not because we removed the due to interest in number 2. And I would, I mean, you could say, we could add 1, or we could add to number 2 something like decline to add funding, decline to, add, dollars to the fund when it's projected to eclipse 1.5%, during the next year or something like that. We could create a a restriction on adding funding if that's what you're concerned about, if you're concerned about those kind of games.
Yeah, I think I just want to make sure that we always come across as good stewards. That's, right, and that we don't have anybody perceiving that we're playing games.
I mean,
I don't think we would, nobody here, but who knows what happens 10 years from now, and who knows what kind of pressure people are under. And that's where I'm trying to make sure we're careful with each other. So what if we said 1.25% and left the only ed money to 1.25%? So it was harder, but it was a higher cap. Net school spend is still going up, and people could always come back and say, this policy is too restrictive in the future, and edit it with a single approval at some point in time in the future, if they wanted to.
I mean, the way I read this, we can go up to 1%. We should not go higher than 1.5%. We should not go lower than 0.5%. Like, that's,
Yeah, as is
So-
written, it's pretty clean in that regard.
so I'm not sure the 1.5%, like the why or how matters, as long as we're cognizant, for those of us currently
Yep.
following the policy.
Yep.
As long as we're cognizant of where it's at. So again, if at the end of this next year, we're at 1.4%, we would give the money back to free cash. Like, we don't need, you know, we don't need to put whatever, a few thousand in to get to 1.5%. So I guess I'm not sure what the due to interest accrual does.
I'm not so worried about that anymore. Sean's point is, Sean was right, is that my point is now that by
You wanna go
softening the
lower.
softening the
Okay.
first one, by softening the first one, we've allowed ourselves to go right up to that 1.49, even 1.5, 1.6. We've softened that first one, and it doesn't really have any teeth to it anymore, right? It doesn't read that way anymore. It reads, the standard practice is to only. So we could just say, hey, well, that's standard, but this is a substandard year or a crazy year. We need to protect ourselves for next year. Let's go up to 1.7, and know we can pull back out at the
So,
beginning of the year.
I would suggest then we add a clause that says something like, funds shall not be added in anticipation of expected, or funds shall not be added to buffer anticipated expenses in the following year. That probably wasn't great, but something to that effect that essentially says, don't do what you're worried about. I think I would just be more explicit about that than
Something about the
trying to
intent of the
use,
fund.
trying to use brackets to get at that point.
Okay, but we finalized the budget essentially, from our perspective, by the end of January.
Yep.
Say in May, June, we all of a sudden know there are going to be some major special education expenses, fill in the blank, that we didn't know when we wrote the budget. Isn't the whole point of this fund so that we can draw on it the next year? So if we have money at the end of the year that would help us the following year, why
So
wouldn't we do that?
That situation is a possibility, and that, you could argue, that's what the intent of this is for, if you have something that, but then we could prepay more, we could do certain
Have
other
other
things in
mechanisms
that
for that.
space. What I'm worried about is, let's go back to 2016, right? And we say, we're going into a year where the percentage is 2%, and we know as of right now, we're gonna have to lay off, 10 teachers. But if we somehow say that we're gonna use this money for the special education teachers, and we move some of that special education money over to the general education fund, then we're technically compliant with MGL by using this money, but in reality, we're funding general education teachers to keep those 10. That's what I'm worried about, is the way that that game could be played. Again, the people in this room, I have no worry about the ethics. I want to be 100% clear about that. But again, who knows what pressure happens, and people come in and say, well, we could use this fund if we do this and this and this. And that, yes, we could, and it would be legal, but it wouldn't be right.
The policy does already say in the second paragraph, it will be used for unanticipated or unbudgeted costs. It doesn't say you can use it to pad
To
your next
budget.
year's budget. So it does already sort of outlaw what you're describing. You're right. I mean, with some accounting tricks, you could probably still make it work, but I don't know if there's language we could come up with that would prevent that, given the sort of fungibility of our cost centers and the frequency with which we do shifts between cost centers anyway, for appropriate reasons, but.
Yeah.
We're also allowed to go up to 2%, and we're saying, no, we think that's too high. Let's not go above 1.5. We've already lowered it.
Yes, we have.
I hear what you're saying.
Yep.
It's important, the way that our town currently operates, it's important that we're giving some money back. It's important for that regeneration.
It's all, I mean, yes, and it's also, I mean, as I watch some of the things that happen in other districts and the way that towns and schools work in other districts or don't work, we're not in that situation, right? But there are cases where some school committees are taking budgets to town meeting that are purposefully over budget, right? Knowing it's over the budget, hoping town meeting will fund it. And if they don't, they're up the creek without a paddle. We're not in that situation, and I hope we're never in that situation, but I also don't want us to have this kind of out. So I'm going to stop from beating that dead horse, and maybe we'll think about the language that's highlighted that Sean supposed is in there as part of our second review. And Sean, maybe you and I can wordsmith that or something
Yeah, I
like
can
that
think about it some more.
from a first reading perspective. Any other thoughts or feedback on the rest of the policy? No? Okay, so let's move the motion then.
Move to approve the first reading of policy DBDA, Special Education Reserve Fund.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor? And all opposed, and the first reading passes 5-0. Okay, so that will close now. So now we will move on to the liaison and subcommittee discussion with potential appointments, and that includes the Charter Review Committee. I may or may not appoint today, depending on how the conversation goes. I may just have to think about it. Chuck, before he left, I asked him what his thoughts were. He said he would serve on the Charter Review Committee, but he'll not arm wrestle anybody for it. He said if there's any, he likes to stay on recreation because it's associated with SWEC, and he wants to stay in SWEC. He's willing to, if somebody else wants to take the coalition, he's willing to give that one up. And that's the summary of his feedback. But I also want to just get the rest of the room feedback, thoughts, and if anybody in particular has a passion for the Charter Review, I'll just, there's a lot of material in the packet for it. I don't know if anybody had a chance to read through all of that material. But I would expect that to be a very heavy meeting schedule for the next year and a half. In the conversation we had with Ivrea and Fidel back in July, I guess it was, I think you can think about at least 2 meetings a month, and in some cases more, for that charter review process. I'll also add this, and I added it to the memo. It's possible that none of us have time to commit to that, and we appoint a designee. If that's the case, if nobody wants to do it or has the time to do it, because everybody's so committed and all the other things we're already in, I'd probably reach out to Alan and see if there was other applicants from town meeting that wanted to do it that had some sort of school touch that I would say we would appoint on behalf of the schools. So with that said, Ivrea didn't think it was going to be a massive modification because so much was done in the 2013, 2014 timeframe. So she, while it will be intensive because every section has to be reviewed and thought about and updated and whatnot, she didn't think it was going to be as massive as the 2013, 2014 one was as well. So I'll stop there and open the floor for any thoughts, feedbacks, things people want to pick or not pick, get away from, not get away from, and go from there. Sean?
I'll just raise my hand. I mean, I know Sarah and Carla are about to be or are already getting very busy with the school building committee, so I'd be happy to take something else off their plates. I am not raising my hand for charter review committee, however.
Okay. Sarah, Carla, do either of you want to give up anything, or?
Tell me, I missed you. I thought you were signing yourself up for the charter review.
I was explicitly
Like I
not
tuned you
signing up
out.
for the Charter Review Committee. No, what I was saying,
heard.
what I was saying is I know you guys are getting very busy with Killam and only going to get busier. I had a little bit of a lighter load last year as, as chair, and now as not chair, I'm volunteering to take one of your other responsibilities off your plate if there's anything you're looking to shed. That's what I was getting at. And also, Tom, if you want to swap FinCom and Select Board as is practice, I'm fine doing that as well. But I'm also fine staying connected to Select Board, either way.
I might swap Chuck out of FinCom and put you there, and take you out of Select Board and put me there,
Sure. Yeah.
considering the stuff we've been doing over the last year or so. He didn't put that up, yes or no, and obviously he's been a FinCom guy for a long time, but that's just something I might do. Because SWEC is also going to be pretty intensive for a little while. Okay, so in terms of things that otherwise could be given up, RCTV, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty light loads. I mean, depending on what the agenda is, if somebody else is interested in
Okay.
getting in on the ice cream social action, I am happy to let somebody else do that.
Okay.
But they are really fun, so if somebody wanted an opportunity to get more involved with them, that's fine.
Bylaw Committee or Board of Library Trustees, Carla?
I'm fine with either. If somebody has a passion to want to do them.
Okay.
But
And Coalition, Chuck already wanted to offer up the Coalition, so, Sean, are any of those something you're interested in?
I think, yeah, I'd be happy to support any of those. I think Coalition, if I remember correctly, I have a standing conflict with, so.
Wednesday, it's the last Wednesday
Yeah,
of
but yeah,
every month.
those are a little more difficult for me, so.
Okay.
That's probably not the best. I wouldn't likely be able to attend very often.
Okay. All right, so I'll take, RCTV, bylaw, Board of Library Trustees, Coalition. Is anybody else interested in the Coalition? Have a time available or anything else?
I cannot do Wednesdays.
I can't do Wednesdays either.
So I'm interested, but
It might end up interestingly aligning with PEAR at some point in time in the near future as well.
yeah, I'd really like to stay with PEAR. I very much enjoy CPAC, but I've also done it for 3 years, so if someone else wanted a turn, I would respect that. I should not do RCTV because my son is employed there. And, Chuck wants rec committee, but I shouldn't do rec committee either because my husband's the chair, so. Yeah, I really like what I'm on, but if
Okay.
you wanted to,
I don't
Mix
I don't
things
feel a
up,
need to mix things up necessarily. I just wanted to make sure we had the opportunity to discuss and, it sounds like people are pretty happy where they are. Sean would pick up something else if we wanted him to. Chuck would stay with Coalition, but would also give it up if somebody wanted it, so, and we don't have anybody beating the table for charter review.
Do not
I'm
have the bandwidth.
fascinated by it. I can't take on that big of a workload right now.
Yeah.
I have a recommendation. There's somebody who follows our meetings closely, who often provides feedback on language questions and that sort of thing, so.
It's possible, yeah, it's possible.
Valid suggestion.
Just by being our number one fan, we designate you.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay. All right. All right, any other thoughts or questions on any of these? No? Okay, then we'll move on. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback. And I'll come back, since it's not as crystal clear as it might otherwise have been. The last on the new business, and we are ahead of schedule, is what we've already talked about, that we have 4 more policies for single review on the 24th at our next meeting. Another point of note before we go into executive session as an agenda point for next meeting. You all know I asked about availability on the 28th. You don't need to worry about that anymore. But we will start the meeting on the 24th, and we'll go into executive session with the Finance Committee. And then we'll come back and do the rest of our meeting after that.
Normal start time?
Normal start time.
Oh, okay.
Okay? So, okay. With that said, I will take one final motion.
Move to adjourn to executive session and not to return to discuss strategy concerning collective bargaining with Reading Teachers Association, Reading Paraeducators Association, and Reading Administrative Secretaries Association, as the chair declares an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee.
We have a second.
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Since we're going into executive session, it's a roll call vote, so we'll do that. Carla?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Tom? Aye. And we are adjourned from open session.
Tom, technical question. List anything different on the agenda in executive, for executive session for the upcoming meeting, the 24th, given it's a shared one in the agenda?
Yes.
I just didn't know if we can give Olivia some guidance on how we.
I'll do it.
You will?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.